Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Vivek. Yeah,
Are you happy that we call you Vivek?
yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm okay with that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
Alex.
Can you hear me okay? Yes, I can. Yeah.
Mm.
Lucianne, did you think that there was somebody else joining? Narinder, I thought might be coming.
Not as far as I know. No.
Okay.
Me, yeah.
Just to clarify, Kieran sent an email, and I'm not sure. He sent it to you, Luciani. Just by way of update, I'm guessing that will be addressed in due course. Mm. Mm.
Can I nominate Councillor Beth Rowland, please?
Yes, I second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'd like us to introduce ourselves before we start. I'm Beth Rowland. I'm a Woodley councillor, Woodley South Lake.
Stephen.
Okay. So Stephen Newton, I'm a ward member for Maiden Early and Whitegates.
And I'm Rebecca Margetts. I'm the ward member for Finch Hampstead.
Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, morning. I'm Rachel Lucas. I'm legal advisor to the panel today.
Alex and Kieran?
Yeah, I'm Alec, licensing officer for Woking Council.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Kieran. I'm the service manager for licensing as a responsible authority today.
Megan?
Good morning. I'm Megan Summerfield. I'm a regulatory solicitor and I'm purely observing today.
Andy?
My name's Andy. I'm a Wokingham Town Councillor, and I live in the centre of Wokingham.
Thank you. Alex?
Good morning. I'm Alex Tomlinson, the solicitor on behalf of the BK UK Group. I'm joined here with Alicia, who's my colleague who submitted the application, and Vivek as well, who's the restaurant manager.
Thank you. Beck, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Vivek and I work as a restaurant manager in Wokingham Burger King for BK UK Group.
That's lovely, thank you, and good morning, everyone. You know we're here to hold the appeal against the officer decision to refuse to grant a new dual private hire licence. Sorry, that's the wrong one.
That was the other day.
that was the yeah from last week.
Yeah,
I've got the wrong paperwork up. Just hold on a minute.
it's okay.
We're going to follow a process which we do for all licensing, in that each in turn actually it says Burger King on it. So I'm going to follow this. Hold on a minute. Much easier when you can shuffle papers in quiet, you know. I'm just trying to find the rules of procedure.
I'm happy to share my screen with them on, if that helps
thank
you,
you.
Beth.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put that down. I'm going to have to make it bigger because I can't read it. The basis of it is that we're going to do things in turn and in order. Okay, I can read it now. I've welcomed everyone and I can't read it, I'm lying. I'm going to have to make it bigger.
Beth, if you click on the bottom left-hand corner, there should be a plus button.
It's on the top. I've made it bigger now.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm going to ask if anyone's got any interest to declare. No, nobody got any interest at all. Thank you. And I'm going to roughly outline the procedure to you, in that we're going to speak in turn, and we're going to start with we've looked at the paperwork that you've got, and then ask the licensing officer to introduce the report that they want to share with us. Alec, are you going to present the report?
Yes, that'll be me.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, members are requested to determine the application for a new premises licence in accordance with Section 18(4) of the Licensing Act 2003, having regard to the representations received and the requirement to promote the 4 licensing objectives. The purpose of this report is to provide the relevant information for the subcommittee to consider and determine the application from BK UK Group Limited for a new premises licence at Burger King, Carnival Field, Leisure Park, Wokingham, RG40 2AT. The following options are open to the Licensing and Appeals Subcommittee: to grant the application in full and on the terms and conditions contained within the application, to include any applicable mandatory conditions; to grant the application as above, modified to such an extent as considered appropriate to satisfy any relevant representations and promote the licensing objectives, or to reject the application. A premises licence is required in respect of any premises where it is intended to conduct one or more of the 4 licensable activities, these being the sale of alcohol, supply of alcohol in respect of a club, regulated entertainment, or the provision of late night refreshments. The applicants, Burger King UK Limited, has applied for the following hours: late night refreshment from 2300 hours until 0500 hours, Monday to Sunday, and opening hours are from 2300 hours to 23:59. Sorry, from 0000 hours to 23:59 hours, Monday to Sunday, so 24 hours essentially. The application has been properly made and all procedures correctly followed. The application has been attached as Appendix A in your pack. Photographs of the blue site notices in place and a copy of the newspaper advert are attached as Appendix B. The premises is a fast food restaurant with a drive-through and car park. The operating schedule is completed by the applicant and contains additional measures to illustrate how they propose to promote the 4 licensing objectives as required by provision of the Licensing Act 2003. The applicants propose the following measures which will be attached as conditions to any licence as may be granted. The premises licence holder or nominated person shall inquire that all relevant members of staff receive training in their responsibilities under the Licensing Act 2003. Such training shall be documented and records made available upon request from the police or an authorised officer of the licensing authority. Sales of hot food and drink are to be via the drive-through facility only from 2300 hours, and the internal restaurant will be closed from this time. Specifically for the prevention of crime and disorder, a CCTV system shall be installed at the premises. CCTV shall be maintained in good order and recording shall be retained for at least 31 days. The correct time and date will be generated onto both the recording and the real-time image screen. The footage will be made available for inspection by authorised officers of the licensing authority and the police upon request. There shall be signs displayed in the customer area to advise that CCTV is in operation. A staff member from the premises who is conversant with the operation of the CCTV system shall be on the premises at all times when the premises is open. This staff member must be able to provide a police or authorised council officer copies of recent CCTV images or data with absolute minimum of delay when requested. An incident log shall be kept at the premises and made available on request to an authorised officer of the council or the police. It must be completed within 24 hours of the incident and will record the following: all crimes reported to the venue, all ejections of patrons, any complaints received concerning crime and disorder, any incidents of disorder, all seizures of drugs or offensive weapons, any faults in the CCTV system, searching equipment or scanning equipment, any visit by a relevant authority or emergency service. Specific to the prevention of public nuisance, no noise generated on the premises or by its associated plant or equipment shall emanate from the premises, nor vibrations be transmitted through the structure of the premises which gives rise to a nuisance. Notices shall be prominently displayed at all exits, requesting patrons to respect the need of local residents and businesses to leave the area quietly. A direct telephone number for the manager at the premises shall be publicly available at all times to the premises is open. This telephone number is to be made available to residents and businesses in the vicinity. No fumes, steam or odours shall be emitted from the licensed premises so as to cause nuisance to any persons living or carrying on a business in the area where the premises is situated. The responsible authorities included in the consultation are Thames Valley Police, Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue, Environmental Health, Trading Standards, Public Health, the Local Planning Authority, the Local Safeguarding Children Board, and Home Office Immigration Enforcement. There has been one representation against the application from the licensing authority as a responsible authority, with concerns that granting a licence would aggravate historic problems with antisocial behaviour in the area, leading to public nuisance and a risk to the safety of the public and Burger King staff. A representation has also been received from Wokingham Town Council with concerns that late opening will create a nuisance for nearby residents. These are attached as Appendix C and D in your pack. Those that have made a representation have been informed of the time and date of the Licensing and Appeals Subcommittee hearing and have been informed of their right to attend. In terms of legal considerations, conditions may only be attached to a premises licence where they are deemed appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. They must be proportionate and not duplicate any existing provisions contained in other legislation. The justification behind a refusal or the attachment of conditions must be given to the applicant. The subcommittee is advised that any findings on any issues of fact should be on the balance of probabilities, and any decision should be based on the individual merits of the application. The subcommittee, in arriving at its decision, must have regard to relevant provisions of national guidance and its own statement of licensing policy, and reasons should be given for any departure. And finally, there is a right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days from the date the applicant is notified of the decision of the Licensing and Appeals Subcommittee. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. We now go on to the applicant, and it's the applicant's right now to present their application, including any witnesses. So who's going to present that report? Does anyone want to ask questions to Alec at this time?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It will be me speaking on behalf of the Burger King Group. I hope to keep my submission sort of short and sweet. As you've heard, we've extensively spoke about the application, and thank you, Alex, for that introduction. In short, the application is for the site to go 24 hours, but it will be drive-through only from 2300 until 5 o'clock. We believe the application to be proportionate to the licensing objectives. We appreciate all the concerns that have been raised in the objections from the licensing authority and from the town council. We have actually further recently, following a conversation with Kieran and my colleague here, Alicia, submitted 3 further conditions to be added to the application, and those relate to sort of antisocial behaviour, crime and disorder, and Wokingham Borough Council's Get Home Safe policy. Just to give you a little bit more detail about the application and the applicant themselves, the BK UK Group are the largest franchisee of Burger King estate in the UK. They run over 200 restaurants across the estate. Recently, they've noticed that there's been an increase in sort of consumers consuming food later on at night, specifically shift workers and other individuals eating sort of later on, and a change in patterns. What's happened is we've seen competitors move into this late night trade, and as a result, Burger King are also following suit. We've made many of these applications across the country. Wokingham isn't the only place that we've made this application, and we're seeing similar issues across the site and across the UK. And we deal with those issues, individually per location. As per this application, I think the main concern here is potential noise nuisance to local residents and antisocial behaviour. In terms of noise nuisance, that is the main concern for Burger King, of course. What we do is that we ensure that no noise nuisance is carried out or happens in the locality. It's not good for business. In short, it doesn't help with local relations. So it's something that we just vehemently try to avoid. As you'll have heard in the conditions, we pass over restaurant managers and that they can contact in the locality should any noise nuisance arise. We put in measures to make sure that it is, as I say, a condition to make sure that no noise nuisance is created from the site. And if that did happen, then your environmental health agency or noise team could enforce on that condition against the operator quite easily. At present, they've not put in a representation because they don't believe that there is a concern in relation to noise emanating from the premises. We'll hear probably from Kieran, I believe, in relation to antisocial behaviour. Again, we appreciate these concerns and we understand where these concerns are coming from. Vivek will attest that recently, as I say, as of 2022, we believe these issues have been mitigated due to your police force and work with the licensing authority. And we want to keep the status quo. There's no reason for us to want to have local people committing antisocial behaviour in the vicinity. We would hope that really having a responsible operator like Burger King in the vicinity open for trading puts people off from causing a noise disturbance or congregating in a certain car park. As again, we've added in conditions to ensure that hopefully if that does ever happen and people do congregate, that we would inform the police immediately, and hopefully that is a warning and a put off to any people in the locality trying to do such a thing. So overall, we think it's proportionate. We hope that you would grant the application as applied for. It wouldn't be that if you do grant this application, that all of a sudden that Burger King starts operating tomorrow 24 hours. There is a lot of things that has to go on internally, operationally, in order for us to extend. And it probably wouldn't be that the site would go 24 hours because there may not be a requirement or a need for it. It's likely that they would slightly increase their hours until possibly midnight or 1 o'clock on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But it does just give the site that commercial flexibility, which is needed in current time in order to be able to trade those hours. And that's it for all my submissions at the moment, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid I've just lost all my instructions. My computer's done something silly. So could somebody please remind me what comes next? Okay. Panel, have you any questions to ask? Andy?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. Alex, you spoke about that if noise were to occur in the vicinity, then the restaurant would report it to the police. Do you have any idea of the police response times to loud noise coming from car parks and highways on a Saturday night?
We don't have obviously timings in police in relation to police response times, of course. What it would be is obviously a preventative measure in order for that to reoccur. I understand what you're saying, that, you know, an instance may occur where noise may happen to the local people or cars may congregate. What we'd want to do is obviously report that to the police in order for that to be a preventative measure for that happening again. We can't stop people congregating in a car park as much as we couldn't do. So if we were closed, people may go there and they may cause a noise, but what we want to do is stop that happening and be a preventative measure from that happening.
And are you aware of the history of car meet type behaviours, not just in Woking Town, but also in the wider borough, where the police have not been able to control the noise coming from these incidents?
Yeah, so kindly, as I say, in Kieran's representation, there has been a report in relation to antisocial behaviour in car meetups, and that they kindly put a PSPO in place there, and that it has been dissuaded away from. Vivek's been at the restaurant for at least 2022. He's not aware of any of those issues currently at the site, and hasn't for the last 2 years because of those preventative measures in place. Again, we would hope that an operator responsible like Burger King in the vicinity is the eyes and ears in order to be able to dissuade that from happening, because at present it is just a car park which is empty, as opposed to it just being people there vigilantly being able to watch and review it.
Okay, so the car park can't be watched from the Burger King site, but the PSPO doesn't apply to highways land, and it's the adjacent highways which have also been in the past affected by the car meet community, if you like, not just in Wokingham Town, but in the wider borough. So the people in this community are informed as to the limitations of their public spaces protection orders, and they use highways instead. And again, I'm not asking a question, but are you aware of the nature and how inadequate, frankly, people reporting from the Burger King would be?
Of course, and I appreciate the concerns. As you say, we are an operator just trying to extend into the layers tonight and attributing potentially antisocial behaviour from people in cars. While we understand the concerns and we'll report as best as we can, it shouldn't, as I say, as I'm sure you're aware, we understand that it is solely a Burger King responsibility in order to deal with those issues. You know, we're trying to trade and hopefully get people who may be shift workers or later on into the evening to get some food in late evening. It shouldn't be that, as I say, just because some individuals who may or may not want to go there be attributed to Burger King for antisocial behaviour. As I say, we are putting conditions in place in order to assure and help as best we can with that issue which the council are facing.
Andy, can I just stop you? Rachel, did you want to come in on that point? You're muted.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something kind of before the point goes any further and gets lost in everything else. Andy, you said the PSPO doesn't apply to highways land. That wasn't my understanding of the PSPO. I might be entirely wrong, but I've got the PSPO in front of me. and I mean it may make no difference to your point whatsoever, but it covers any land, as far as I'm aware, owned, maintained or managed by the council, and any other place to which the public has access as a right or virtue of express or implied permission, and it's borough wide. I may well be wrong, but that's what the PSPO says. So as far as I'm aware, it is borough wide.
So my understanding is it is for borough land, but it's not for highways, because highways is if you like, governed by the law and by the police. So the PSPOs we have don't, for example, extend, and I'm talking from experience in Bournemouth and Whitegates, they apply perhaps to car parks, but they don't apply to the public highway adjacent. So in the case of the Burger King, you have the Burger King's on a roundabout, leading off in one direction. You have the roundabout by the Elmsfield, and then leading down the hill to Finchampstead, you have the roundabout by Tesco. And I have already seen cars using those roundabouts as, if you like, a skidding circle. And at the moment, there's no reason for people to go to that area. If there's an all-night Burger King, there will be a reason for people to go to that area. And
I will leave you to carry on. Sorry, but I will bottom out the question about the PSPO while you're carrying on, if that's all right.
Thank you, yes.
Andy, was that the end of your question?
I'm trying to think. I've got other things that I can hopefully talk about later on, but I think that'll do for the time being.
Okay. Is there anyone else that wants to ask questions? Rebecca.
Thank you, Beth. Yes, Alex, it's good to hear from you. Obviously, there are some genuine concerns about this because it is a residential area, and obviously a lot of these other premises are within kind of like more industrial areas and shops, but this is something that's on its own next to a block of flats. So you said you're going to mitigate, Burger King will mitigate the effects of this, and you don't believe there will be any noise. Why do you believe there will not be any noise when there will be cars that wouldn't normally be travelling to the area during the night, and also people speaking, and people will congregate to eat their food? So why do you think there won't be any additional noise?
So in short, in the absolute correct, people will be coming through the drive-through. At the moment, the drive-through is partially covered and it is set a little bit away from the apartment blocks. Now, at present, as I say, there isn't any noise. We've not been notified of any noise, and none of the residents in those apartment blocks have raised any concerns in relation to this application. Now, it's not to say, as I say, that we will be going 24 hours through the night from the offset. What we're doing is, as I say, giving the ability and flexibility to potentially increase that until possibly midnight or 1 o'clock in order to allow that to happen. Now, if noise is becoming an issue and if there does become a problem with this application, of course, we will put in measures to mitigate that. Now, that may be, as I say, that we can't have a certain amount of time, or it may be that we don't want certain amounts of cars to come through and mitigate for that reason. But at present, we're not aware, and we have a very good relations with those apartment block residents, so that there aren't any noise issues in those later nights at 10, 11 o'clock. So we don't believe that there will be any issues moving that into the earlier hours.
But you're saying you will mitigate, but how will you mitigate? How will you actually reduce the amount of cars or reduce the noise if you were to find noise?
Of course. So, for example, as you say, mentioning people speaking, so sometimes the tannoys may make a noise, and that may be in a butch, and when you go through the drive-through and it comes through a tannoy, so sometimes what we would do is to say remove that and have the person speak to the individual through the window in those sorts of instances. So it depends very specifically as to what sort of noise measures may be an issue. Sometimes it may be light pollution, that may be a little bit of a pollution to those within the local residents, and what we would do is specifically turn off certain lights in order to allow that there wouldn't be anyone impeding on local lighting in the local residence area. So it depends situationally if any noise nuisance appears to happen. But at present, as I say, we're not aware of any issues and have a very good working relationship with those people in the flat. So we're hoping that's going to continue in the same vein.
Thank you.
Kieran.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Could you spoke about how there's an application that's come in for the hours that are being applied for now, but it came across as though it's not going to be the case that it's going to shift to the 24-hour or the 5 a.m. opening, and you mentioned about how there's been a series of almost like blanket applications across Burger King UK, and you've experienced different responses probably from other authorities across the country there. But for Wokingham, it came across as though there's an application in until 5 a.m, but there's not necessarily an expectation that the site at Wokingham is going to trade immediately to those hours. It may be more the case that it may go to midnight or 1 a.m. Considering these applications are supposed to be dealt with on their own merits, and as part of that kind of discourse, we do kind of want to have a greater idea in terms of what the hours are and how the business is planning to be operated. Could I invite you to give us a bit of detail in terms of what those initial plans might be, and how, should you be granted a license from the subcommittee today, what steps would be in place in terms of utilising the hours, and how is that operation going to unfold?
Of course, and again, thank you for the opportunity to do so. The reason for the application as is because, again, we've applied in this instance across the country to allow this flexibility, and it is that flexibility commercially in order to discuss on where we'd like to go. Now, as I say, it's not going to be that if this application is granted that all of a sudden that the Burger King in Wokingham will be going 24 hours. What we have to do is have a look at statistics as to say, well, what days are the busy period later on in the evening, what hours are going to be potentially the most profitable in order for people to come through with cars, and home delivery services, which also run through the drive-through. And it's usually, as I say, for instance, at the moment, it's the Friday and Saturday nights. So if we are taking money sort of later on into that evening at 11 o'clock, we possibly push that back to a 12 o'clock, and if that is working and that's working well, then we potentially again look at potentially increasing that again to 1. What happens with the 5 o'clock, and the reason for the 5 o'clock, is because, as you all know, Kieran, if we were to say to apply till midnight on a Friday, Saturday, and then realise that actually midnight on a Friday, Saturday is very profitable and working well, we'd have to come in with a whole new application again for a full variation just to extend into half an hour. So what we do is apply for those hours and then work again operationally to what is going to be most suitable. It may be that all of a sudden Wednesday is a profitable day and Wednesday is a very busy day for that Burger King for certain reasons. Possibly there's a football match or something. We'd like to be able to have the opportunity to potentially open past 11 o'clock until possibly 11:30 or midnight on that day in order to allow for that to happen. So I understand why you're using, or we'd like the more specifics of the application, which I completely appreciate, but it is just allowing that commercial flexibility across the board to allow us to be a responsible operator and use it as we wish.
Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate that. Our nearest team for Wokingham's probably Reading Football Club, so we don't necessarily have a big state. We certainly don't license a stadium here in the borough of Wokingham, so we don't necessarily have that draw. The locality of Wokingham town centre, it's almost a large market town. There's no as far as I'm aware, we don't even have late night sort of chicken food premises. We don't have sort of late night kebab shop premises in the town centre, and the town centre is thriving in terms of the pubs and bars and restaurants. It's thriving. There's a cracking nighttime economy there, and a really engaged nighttime trade. But what we don't have is that later license for food, and you've heard obviously from ourselves some of the concerns, but I think I understand where you're coming from in terms of putting in an application and seeking the hours and effectively testing, almost testing the water in terms of the commercial viability of it all. I know from the council and from the policy that's put forward, Wokingham is intended to thrive, and there is a balance of supporting business, but there's also a balance of public safety, and there are concerns here, and this premises would be could potentially be a catalyst for change in the area. It could potentially be quite a significant one, considering the landscape or the topography of how Wokingham is. I'd just be slightly more interested in terms of, now that perhaps you might be getting a bit more of an idea of how the Wokingham town centre is, where it might be the case of the viability of the business for Burger King. Is there any ability from your side to lessen those hours that have been applied for? So, for example, and I don't know what where these conversations go, but you're obviously hearing about some of the concerns that are being raised. I can understand you wanting to test the viability of the site, but it may be a more comfortable application to be heard if those hours have been applied for are on the Friday or Saturday nights, and you want to try them until the midnight or 1 a.m. in the first instance. Have you given any consideration in terms of amendments around the hours there, Alex?
Of course, and it is completely up to the discretion of the councillors in order to do so. We are happy in order to continue to have those conversations. Ideally, obviously, the Thursday, Friday, Saturday are typically the busier sort of times, but it's not necessarily always the case. But we'd be happy to reduce the hours, again, in agreement with the councillors if that is something that they'd wish to do in order to give that sort of leeway. We'd probably look for sort of 2 a.m. Thursday, Friday, and then a midnight sort of the rest of the week. Again, just to allow us to have that sort of ability to possibly trade into those hours if needs be. But yeah, I completely understand the concern, as I say, for a 24 hours at present, and we appreciate that. I think from our perspective, what we have done historically in some other locations which are similar to Wokingham is that grant the application and trust the responsible operator of Burger King, which is, as you know, known nationally, to operate responsibly with those hours, and which we do so across the board. But if you are somewhat feeling a little bit concerned in relation to the hours, we'd be happy sort of to amend that to possibly 2 o'clock on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then the midnight for the remainder of the week, should those that sort of alleviate the concerns for the remainder of the councillors there.
Thank you. Steve Newton, please.
Thank you. Rebecca's partly covered my concerns, so I won't repeat that again. Looking at the site map, the route for people wanting to use the late night facility would be driving around the back of the building, which does bring them really adjacent to where the flats are. And I think that's one of my primary concerns. There is another which I'll come to in a moment. And now I've used this sort of facility, and where you're trying to order, you've got the intercoms going. Late at night, as you know, noise tends to travel further because there's no other noise to interrupt anything, and it does tend to go. And you've got the car motors and so on, engines going. Even if it's not a modified vehicle, the car noise will be different. And so I can see that there would be this. Now, you've said that you're going to mitigate sound, but that's primarily, I would have thought, coming from the building. Have you got any thoughts as to how you could mitigate sound coming from the intercom exchange and also from the car's engines in that area, particularly round the back of the premises where it is so adjacent to the flats? Because if it was a different layout and the cars weren't so close to the flats, but they're at the most of your site, it's the bit that's most close to the flats is where the cars will be going and where the intercom bit will be. So that does cause me some concern, to be honest with you. And the other thing that concerns me is when I was at school, I used to work at a hotel, and I was too young to drive, didn't have a car or anything, and so late at night they actually would pay for me to get to and from the hotel for safety by a taxi. I've noticed in your application that you're saying that you would advise people of sort of local public transport. But that, as we all know, that gets really limited as to what routes are available. And I'm just thinking that, particularly to try and be fair to staff, just telling them, oh, this bus goes in 2 hours after your shift finishes, or whatever it is, doesn't seem to me to be sort of really meeting a duty of care in my mind. So I'd like you to sort of talk about the sound from the users, not from the building, and also how you're going to undertake staff welfare, because you, as I say in your applicant, it just says you will advise them of public transport, or words to that effect.
Of course, and thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the noise from the building, when it becomes sort of a later night operation, the operation is reduced in terms of how much is running, in short. So it's usually that there's only sort of one fire, one oven, those sort of things running. So the actual operation of the premises is reduced in itself. When it comes to, as I say, the tannoy or the potential of speaking through a microphone system, again, if that does become an issue or a noise issue within the locality, and we notice that and have mentioned that people may contact the manager and say, oh, we're hearing the tannoy speaking, then we would just stop using the tannoy service, and we would just have it so that you would have a conversation face to face with the individual at the booth in order to make your order, and again, hopefully mitigating for those noise issues. In terms of car noise, again, it's not something that realistically often creates that much noise in terms of drive-throughs, and we see that across the board and across the country. Usually people will just, let's say, drive in, usually quite slowly, and they will be able to order their food and then drive away. Usually again, it's just sort of shift workers or people like myself who may be coming back from, I don't know, a holiday somewhere who need a little bit of late night food. It's not individuals that are often trying to, you know, create a certain amount of noise or create a disturbance in the local area. It is, you know, normal people just operating normally and within that sort of time frame. Going back to your point in terms of staff, so we have had a chance to discuss this with the manager, Vivek, and already Burger King do a lot in order staff welfare and staff policy to make sure that everyone does get home safely. At the moment, we would never leave so that it's just one individual who leaves by themselves. There's always a pair system to make sure that people are getting home safely. A lot of the staff actually for this site do drive to the site and then they leave in their own individual cars. Again, we would be looking at getting taxis home for young individuals who aren't able to drive and getting them home, and the condition is what we're offering. I know you appreciate saying, oh, there's just a bus service down the road. It would be more detailed plans for saying these are the bus services, these are the taxi services, this is what's available at what time and when, to make sure that everyone does get home safely. If there is no available links later on in the evening or later on at night, then we would be looking at other measures, whether that be people taking them home with a staff manager, or whether that be a taxi service paid for by Burger King. Those are all the options in which we are presenting to make sure that people do get home safely. It is, I must say, a paramount concern of Burger King for the staff policy and staff welfare to make sure people are getting home safely.
Thank you. Andy?
Yep. Thank you. First of all, an apology for inadvertently misleading the panel. Apparently PSPOs do apply to highways land. However, for PSPOs to be enforced, one needs CCT evidence of the offending cars so that you can actually enforce your PSPO, and there's no CCTV which covers those roads. So Alex, my question is about who is going to be using or trying to use the drive-through. I mean, you've mentioned a few times, you know, nighttime economy, shift workers rather, trying to get some food. But is it not true that the vast majority of people, and I think this is reflected in the discussion you just had, are going to be people coming from the pubs? I mean, Kieran's already mentioned the nighttime economy. Wokingham has 12 pubs that close after 11 o'clock, so 12 or 1 or 2 o'clock on Friday, Saturday, and even on Sunday. All of these pubs are within a 10-minute walk of the Burger King. Now, I appreciate that, and I think the application does acknowledge this. There, inside the Burger King building, there would be a big risk of disorder, having that many drunk people turning up to try and get something to eat. And you've acknowledged that because you've said it's going to be drive-through. But some people just aren't rational when they're drinking, and there's nothing that Burger King can do to stop those people. And I've seen them. I'm a regular user, if you like, of the very late nighttime economy in Wokingham. There's nothing you can do to stop people turning up and trying to get service. is there?
In terms of when you say, would that be individuals walking to the premises, or would this be people driving to the premises?
That they will walk and they will try and get served in the drive-in.
We would refuse service of anyone who is walking there. Now, I understand, as you say, that people may attempt to do so, but we would refuse. And if that situation were to escalate in any way, then we would inform the police. It wouldn't be that we would be able to accept anyone in that regard. And we would hopefully, after the first time, if they did attempt to do so, that we would stop that. Again, it won't be advertised as if you explain that, advertise that people will be able to come. It will be just advertised on, as I say, possibly on the online app or possibly on the delivery services. It won't be nationally sort of advertised in the local town centre that you could come to Burger King and receive food in that regard.
Woking is, as I think someone said, it's a small market town. If it's serving food at night, people will know about it. And I've been in pubs when people have come in desperate for somewhere to go. And if someone says there's a drive-in, you can chance it there, they will chance it. And you've said there will be refused service. And if you're refusing service to people who are not acting rationally, there will be the sort of, I don't know, I guess it's all the categories, isn't it? Antisocial behaviour, crime and disorder, etc. in the area. And I just think it's unfortunate because of the proximity of the Burger King to all of the pubs in the town centre. I don't think any applicant could do anything to mitigate that, because that's what drunk people do. That's why in the town centre at night there's probably 12 security staff at the various pubs to manage, kicking out time. Hello?
Yeah,
Alex has disappeared.
Yes. I hope he'll be back in a moment.
I'm sure.
Yeah, here he comes.
Apologies, Andy. Sorry, my internet just dropped out, and I got to the point in relation to you have individuals who you believe that because of the location that people will come to the Burger King in order, and then you're concerned for that possibly creating antisocial behaviour as a result and refusal of service and that sort of thing.
I'm almost certain that will happen, and with I just don't think that any application in that area for a late night food could get around that. It's just the nature of the beast, and the beast being people who are irrational when they're drunk.
Again, I appreciate your concerns there. I would hope to think that people, won't be walking trying to get food from the drive-through, which is again specifically only drive-through. And I appreciate your concern that people may do so, and that might be an antisocial behaviour point. I mean, again, for myself, I've been known to be merry on the odd occasion. I'm sure many people in this, online room have been, so that if we ever were to walk, I would walk possibly somewhere that wasn't drive-through only and potentially get food elsewhere. And if I did turn up to a place in which then refused me service that the following week or month later, that we didn't attempt to do so again. It's not something that we've really seen it across any of the sites at all. And again, I appreciate that, this is specific to this site and the location specific to this, but it's really not a concern that we have raised elsewhere. And if it was to be, again, then we would have to manage that operationally to say, that people aren't allowed there, or possibly look at getting door staff or risk assessed door staff to enable that. But it's not a concern at present that we're aware of.
It's a concern. I mean, as I said, I'm an expert on Wokinham's nightlife. I've been to all of the kebab vans that we had, and I've been to all of the pubs, and I've been there kicking out time for most of them. And people just aren't rational. I mean, the second question is there is a culture, because the kebab vans tend to be further and further away, or people are travelling back home, for example, to Finchampstead or to Winnish or slightly further away. That they'll get a taxi from the town centre. They'll take the taxi to the kebab van. They'll get out of the taxi, order the kebab, and then hang around until the order's fulfilled. Now, I appreciate that in a drive-through, people are in the queue, but people are used to that thing of getting a taxi to get food, and they will be getting out of the cars because they'll need a smoke, or they'll want to go and have a wee because, after they've been in the pub all night, they need to go to the toilet. And that there is already a slight problem in the there's some vegetation between a row of shrubs between the Burger King and the Finchampstead Road, where people coming from town go for a wee. You know, so with more people there, and mostly going to be drunk, it's going to be a bigger issue. And again, how are you going to stop that?
Again, so in this example, there should be people who are going into a taxi and then going through the drive-through, which is again permitted potentially, whether the taxi driver would allow them to have the food and then take the food. The nature of a Burger King drive-through again isn't similar to a kebab van. You order the food through the first window, you receive the food through the second window, and then you drive on. We wouldn't allow people to get out of the cars in the drive-through or allow the people to go out to potentially take away in any shrubbery in any sense. And if that were to happen, then we would just simply refuse service from that point onward and tell them to move on. We just wouldn't allow it. It's not good for business. It doesn't look good for Burger King, and it doesn't look good for the local area in terms of communications with local residents. We just simply would not allow that to happen.
But I don't see how you can stop it.
Well, again, we would refuse service. We would mention to the taxi driver, who would be the person of point of contact, to say that we will no longer be taking any of these orders and you will have to move out of here. I mean, of course, they can go to the car park, which is adjacent to that area. But what would benefit that be to the taxi driver to have these individuals in the car park and no longer having a fare? It wouldn't make sense to him, surely, or to the people in the taxi.
The practice is to keep the tab running. So the time keeps running. So the taxi drivers aren't out of pocket, and it's something they're used to doing, is to turning up and waiting and then carrying on. I mean, frankly, you're not going to be seeing people. You're going to be dealing with a taxi driver. You're not going to have somebody looking at the CCTV live, checking on what the inhabitants of the vehicles are doing.
But again, from the drive-through, so you're expecting this in this scenario that someone is going to be getting out further up the road, causing a nuisance?
No, I'm expecting while they're in the queue, because unless everything is going through, if there's a queue, that's what people will be doing.
In terms of like queuing for the drive-through, we don't envisage there will be much queuing at all in terms of the actual cars and mountains that goes through. It's not that many in terms of hourly pass-through rate, so we don't envisage there to be a queue. So it would have to be that on the odd occasion that there was a queue, which again, not very many times that there is, that people would then get out of the car. Again, if we saw that or were to notice that in any way, then we would refuse service and we would not allow that to happen again. I understand the concern in relation to people potentially leaving the town centre and going for urinating in the local vicinity, but again, that can't be the totality of Burger King's responsibility in order to stop people from doing so.
But that activity will increase because if the application is granted. And I think that's and I feel bad for you, because it is something you can't stop, but it's something which will happen if the application is granted.
But you're saying here is that people will go to the Burger King, get out and have a wee, and then carry on and have that. But what we're having here now is again, we're having staff members on site, a restaurant which is having CCTV running, all the conditions available which are enforceable by the local police, environmental health and licensing authority, and have all of those measures in place to allow to prevent these things from happening. Because at the moment, people can just go and in a taxi and get out and urinate where they wanted. I understand that you say, well, they may be going to get some food, but we're hoping, as I say, that food is a very quick and timely process in order for them to acquire it and carry on. And at the moment, we're aiming hopefully to have people similar to myself, maybe yourself, and shift workers from hospitals and other things that may just want some food later on into the evening, not necessarily revellers from pubs and bars and that sort of thing from the town centre.
I think the discussion we had earlier about talking about the hours showed that really it's about the pub closing crowd. This isn't about people from hospitals or shift workers. If you're looking at extending the hours, initially by an hour or two on, say, a Thursday, or Friday, or Saturday, that's nothing to do with hospital workers. That's to do with people who've come from pubs. So I think it's a little bit of a red herring, isn't it? To sort of start dropping hospital workers and shift workers in it when it's really all about capturing the mostly drunk nighttime trade. And with all the problems
in terms of, I understand, because it's not necessarily the drunk nighttime trade, because again, most people who are drunk either will be in taxis, and taxis often will not frequent drive-throughs. It's people who are travelling from certain areas to certain times. Again, people like myself who will go through that, and not, again, people who are drunk, can't drive the car, so it's the only way is via taxi, and that taxi service may or may not allow them to go through so, because you have to eat the food predominantly in the car, which a lot of taxi services again. I appreciate that you know the locality closer to me than in terms of what is, but those concerns we think aren't very present elsewhere in locations which are very similar to this.
Okay, and I guess the other way in which people get home from the pub after a night out is with the obviously very wisely designated driver. Now, designated driver won't have any of the concerns about their friends getting out of the car.
And no, I think we've probably exhausted this now. Can I go back to Alec, who's got a question? Alec.
It's not so much a question, but an observation might help the panel. Having been in this situation myself once several years ago, popular sort of like mapping apps, Google Maps, Apple Maps, that sort of thing. You look up a local restaurant, it will say opening hours all 5 a.m. and at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, it won't say drive-through only, so people do turn up and get turned away. It does happen. Just if that helps the panel at all.
Thank you. Andy Croy, have you still got your hand up?
My apologies.
Okay, thank you very much. May I ask a question of you, Alex, please? You said earlier on that you'd made licence applications for this to many other licensing authorities. Can you give us some idea of how many have been granted and how many have been turned around, and if any are operational and where they are?
Of course. So at present, I believe, and Alicia will tell me more, but we're currently on about 90 applications. Of those 90 applications, I would say probably about a 95% grant rate, often without having to go to a hearing. Of locations similar to yourselves, which is sort of the residential area and sort of just out of town centres. We've had Southampton, Sunderland. We've got the applications currently running in Reading as well for 2 of those sites. I think there's currently 3 sites in Reading, which our applications are in, but Kieran may or may not know in the locations for those, because I know it's not your bother, but you probably speak across the board. In terms of similar issues in Sunderland, the Burger King is absolutely encapsulated by residential flats. Actually, you would drive through, as you similarly do there, and drive through essentially in the borough of all of those windows. And they granted the application subject to further conditions being added, but yeah, in relation to believing that Burger King will operate responsibly. Again, just to reiterate, none of the actual residents to that apartment block put in a representation. Signage was posted all over the place in relation to the application, and nobody went in and even spoke to the manager, Babek, because we have such a good relationship with those individuals.
Lovely. Any further questions at this stage? No. Alex, do you have? Oh, Andy.
Sorry, just on Alex's last question. So I'm sure that the councillors certainly will be aware of the difficulty in getting any sort of response, or the different response rates that one gets between different communities. And I just wondered, Alex has said a couple of times now that he's not had responses from communities while simultaneously having a good relationship with communities that are adjacent to Burger King's. And I'm just wondering, are you aware that people in flats often do not respond, and they're much less likely to respond to any sort of local sort of engagement? And we find this as councillors, we knock on doors, you just don't get the answers. It's, I don't know what it is, it's something about flat living, especially modern flats. People just don't seem to take part in what's going on in the local area. Are you aware of the differences between that sort of community and, say, the community of a nice row of semi-detached houses?
Of course, as I say, people live in different localities and different ways of living. But in terms of this application, because of the locality, I mean, notices have been posted up and down that street and around the restaurant itself. A big blue notice, as I'm sure you've seen in the papers. I mean, when I walk past those things and go past those things, I do notice them. Admittedly, I work in the field, so may have a little bit more of a propensity to do so. But we often do find that there is engagement. Again, we have done so across the board for all of the applications. We just don't believe in this case that they are a concern concern because we operate it so well at the moment that they trust us to do so. But I appreciate your concern that maybe some people may not want to engage with the process, but as I say, that they have the democratic right to do so and have chosen not to at the present, so we can only go on that basis that they're not concerned with the application.
Okay, we've had a fairly thorough discussion on that, but I'm going on according to the order of preference that we have, and I'm going through it. If there are no questions, that's absolutely fine because we've had a conversation. Alex, do you want to tell us anything that we haven't already discussed?
Sorry, was that myself? No, we're happy
Yes.
at present. Happy again if there's any other questions, but no, we're happy at present. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm myself, Lucian.
Okay, that's lovely. Then we'll do that. I thought you couldn't tell I was making it up as I went along.
You're doing a grand job. You're doing a grand job. Andy, do you want to go ahead of me or?
Andy, do you want to go first for the town council?
He's on mute now.
Well, that was a relief, wasn't it? So I don't mind. I don't mind. Do you want me to go first? Then. Okay.
Yeah, go on.
I'll try and keep it quick. Okay. First of all, the town council 100% supports and would like to amplify the reports and comments made by Kieran in his report that was available in the agenda back. We don't believe that the mitigations which are detailed go anywhere near addressing the concerns. The local nighttime economy, as I've said, consists of 12 pubs within 750 metres, all of which are within a 10-minute walk of the Burger King. And they're fine establishments, they're fine customers, but the people will try and go to the Burger King and get service. Wokingham a small town. People will know if it's serving through the night. Some people will get the drive-through thing. Some people won't care. Some people are going to be very drunk and they will try it on, and that will lead to exactly the sort of behaviours which cause there to be so many doormen on the pubs in the town. I think the applicant has already acknowledged this risk by making clear it is drive-through and it's not in restaurant. And obviously that's not as bad in restaurant. I mean, when we saw this at the town council, the word which came to everyone was carnage. It would just be a disaster zone. Having a drive-through reduces that, obviously, but the reason it's gone to drive-through is because of the risk of very, very drunk people behaving very, very badly and trying to get access to food, and they will be at the site. And I feel bad for Burger King because in that location, I don't think they or any other applicant can do anything about that, and it's just where the location is. It's a residential area. You've got the flats, which are 3 metres away, I think, at the closest point. There are, I think, 55 houses in those flats there, something like that, in those 2 blocks. We have flats which are about to be completed on the other side of Carnival Pool. There's 55 apartments there. We have flats just opposite on the Finch-Hampstead Road. We have Norton Road. We have Carey Road, and we have the Finch-Hampstead Road as well. And we also have Elmsfield, the new houses on Elmsfield, which are all within like a 2-minute walk of the Burger King and will be affected by any antisocial behaviour coming from there. I've got some notes on how people will try and get access. I've already, I think, highlighted those in my questions to Alex. People will try and get access on foot. People will get taxis. There is even a risk, I think, of people getting a taxi just to get the Burger King and then bailing on the taxi once they've had the service, if they think that's the only way they can get food. I think there's a real risk of conflict with the taxi trade and taxi drivers. The designated drivers, that's another route by which people will get there, and people will get out the cars. You know, they won't get out of the cars just when they're waiting for service, but once they have been served, they will be looking for, many people will be looking for somewhere to eat, and they'll want to eat quickly. And there are car parking bays at the Burger King, which are a natural place for people to park up and eat because they won't want the food to get cold as they're going home. There's also a risk they will park in the adjacent parking associated with the nearby flats, as well as in the Carnival pool parking and in Elmsfield and in the adjacent roads. There is also the risk that as the designated drivers are not on their way home, but they're effectively hanging around, I think the risk of designated drivers showing off to their friends and sort of merging with that sort of car meet mentality, where you'll have the poor, let's call it poor driving on the associated roads. You've got a natural racetrack between the roundabout outside the Burger King, the roundabout at Elmsfield, and the roundabout at Tesco. So, and I've already seen people using those roundabouts as like a skidding track. If you've got more people there later, the driver may be sober, but the driver may also be very, very excited because they have a car full of drunk friends, and they're only in the area because they've been to the Burger King. The range of the Burger King is going to be quite large. I mean, I appreciate, you know, Alex has sort of mentioned that this is perhaps a new thing with Burger King type establishments applying for late night restaurants. I couldn't find any in the local area. I mean, there's a McDonald's in Reading, in the industrial estate associated with the Majeski, what was the Majeski Stadium. I can't find any in Bracknell. The potential range and the potential for people to come in from quite far outside the area is quite big, and that will lead, I think, to conflict, because again, historically in the past, when you have people from, say, Wokingham mixing, drunk people from Wokingham mixing with drunk people from, say, Bracknell or Reading, that you are more likely to get, and I've seen that, you know, as a young man, I was possibly involved in one or two of them. It happens, and if you bring people together who are drunk, it happens. And I've got some detailed notes on West Forest Place, Silk Court. They're the flats immediately adjacent. Now, they may not, you know, I've mentioned briefly how they may not engage in the process. I mean, I think we all as councillors, and look at those notices. I didn't know that there was this application. You know, I live 400 metres away. I only heard about it, and I read the paper. I only saw it because I'm on the town council, and it came in front of one of our committees. I mean, I appreciate that's the legal minimum. It's done, that has been done, but it's not necessarily good engagement with the local community. And the people in the flats may not be worrying about it now, but we all know, all the councillors know, that often people react after the event and they wish they had said something before the event. And I'm pretty sure, you know, when I've discussed this application with people who live in the town, the absolute horror, I mean, even at the drive-through, that it would happen is very, very real. And it's real because of the risk of antisocial behaviour, and in particular relating to the behaviour of drivers. And it's the upset that was caused by the antisocial driving in the Carnival pool car park was huge. I mean, you could hear that noise on the other side of Wokingham. So you had what, 15,000 people more? No, 15,000 adults. So it's probably about 20 or 30,000 people were subject to that noise. And even if it's only for a few minutes on a Saturday night, it takes on an import that that perhaps seems disproportionate, but it does affect people and affects people's quality of life. Now, whether you want to call that criminal or antisocial or public nuisance, I don't know, but it certainly falls into those categories. I think no one will understand if anything is done which risks that behaviour returning to Wokingham.
Thank you, Andy.
So again,
I said thank you.
And then I've got I've detailed several points in which I don't believe the application has adhered to the licensing policy. I can list those off, or I can circulate basically my notes. It's up to you, Beth.
Can you circulate them?
Okay. I have sent it to Luciani and
It's not going to be put in the public domain.
Shall I very quickly read out the parts of the licensing policy? If
Very
I number
quickly,
those
because
parts.
you've had a very fair go at this.
I have, okay. So I think I'll read them out. I think paragraph 7.4, 7.6, 7.9, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, and 12.12. Shall I read those again for the
professionals?
So it's 7.4, 7.6, 7.9, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, and 12.12. I don't think the application meets the tests in those areas.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Kieran, we come over to you now.
Thank you, Chair. Alec, you've got your hands up. Did you want to come in before myself? Alec.
Yeah, just one point to add. And Andy listed a load of restaurants. There is a McDonald's in Lower Rayleigh by the Asda that has a license for late night refreshment until 5 AM. Whether they necessarily use that is another matter, but just for a bit of clarity there.
Okay, thanks, Alec. Councillors, I think that there needs to just be some level of a short history to this application, please, if we can. The application was submitted, and it was submitted as a 24-hour opening with the late night refreshment till 5 AM, so 11 till 5. Currently the Burger King closes at 11, I believe. On that application, on submission of that application, there was some correspondence with our environmental health service manager, who asked some questions around the use of the premises in terms of if the premises were to be open as a restaurant area, not just drive-through only. So there was a relatively quick amendment to the application, and there's a series of conditions that were added. So in your report, which Alec has presented, there are a number of conditions that are included, and in addition to those conditions, there's one more condition that basically says it's going to be drive-through only. Now that goes some way. It goes some way to tackling some of the issues that we may have had, and which Councillor Croy has also highlighted in terms of people on the premises. And there's all sorts of concerns, you know, if that were to be a case that the restaurant was licensed quite late on in the evening due to groups that might gather, in terms of people, young persons as well, in terms of their safeguarding. And obviously being in that town centre location, the amount of pubs that we have nearby, and the fact that there is no late night refreshment readily available. I know there's a kebab shop that people can drive to, and there's some issues around that. So it would have been a drastic change. But the reality is the application was amended, and they've suggested that it be drive-through only. During the application process, I know our licensing officer has asked for the Get Me Home Safely assessment. So that's during the application process. And then ultimately, towards the end of the application, there wasn't a response from that request, and a representation was submitted on behalf of the licensing authority as a responsible authority. So I'm speaking to you now as a responsible authority on behalf of licensing. And I draw the subcommittee's attention to how a Get Me Home Safely assessment is not provided. And in the chat, what I've provided is conversations that I've had with the applicant's solicitors, and gratefully they've provided several extra amendments to this application. And it includes there, in terms of a copy of the Get Me Home Safely policy being available for inspection by an authorised officer of the council or police. During conversations today, in terms of the presentation, we've also heard that the applications themselves are almost fleeting applications nationally, and there's been a good standard of success with those applications. I believe there's a quotation of around 95% that have gone through. The reality is, in terms of the Licensing Act, we have to deal with each application on its own merits. And if there's applications that are going in for Reading or other boroughs or Sunderland or wherever it might be, there could be a whole host of different factors around. So we need to very much concentrate on Wokingham, on our town centre, and how this might impact in terms of the licensing objectives for this area for Wokingham. And during the conversations that we've had, we've heard that there is some level of acknowledgement to how slightly reduced hours could be applied for that may be more acceptable to the applicant. For example, the hours have been given midnight through the week and on Thursday, Friday, Saturday until 2 a.m. I think, from my perspective, what we've had is an application that's come in, and credit to Councillor Croy and you know, our own licensing officer for trying to steer this application in the way that it should be best presented to yourselves as a subcommittee. But I think in terms of what I've heard today, in terms of where we're at with this application, I must encourage caution and hesitance to the subcommittee in still considering this application. We are absent of some of the detail, in particular the Get Me Home Safely campaign. We are aware that there's been issues, particularly around vehicle nuisance, and a PSPO was introduced, and you know, we've heard about the year 2022 and there's been a changeover with the restaurant manager, and it happened to be the case that late 2022 the PSPO was put in place, and there were some measures that were involved from both the council side of things and the police side of things, and that mitigated the issues. So there's some success there. The concern that's presented to the subcommittee is how this site would be quite a drastic change. It'd be a significant change for the area to have a late night premises to such hours early in the morning. So it'd be quite a significant change. It is obviously a town centre environment, but it's not a city centre. And considering there are not any other late night refreshment premises in that Wokingham town centre area, this is on the cusp of that town centre area. It's going to be quite a change. We have obviously had concerns in terms of the issues around antisocial behaviour with the vehicles. If I just draw you in terms of process, for the Get Me Home Safely campaign, from the statement of licensing policy, which has just been reviewed this year, so I know councillors will be well versed in this, but in terms of our actual policy, any new application seeking licensable hours past 11 p.m, they're expected to put provisions in place for the staff working past 11 p.m. They need to identify workable solutions to facilitate safe travel home, such as getting supplemented taxi travel for late night workers. And on application itself, all premises licence holders must provide to the licensing authority a risk assessment that includes an individual staff member's journey times and potential hazards once they have left the place. I don't want to labour the points too much here, but it does, and I think there's potential, should another application be submitted at a later date, that a solid application could be provided, but as it stands, and with some of the issues that have been raised, we don't necessarily have that. There's a difference between workers potentially finishing around 5-6 a.m, because ultimately, if they're finishing as late at night as that, it could well be the case that there's already existing bus routes to get home, because that's quite an early start. But then there's not necessarily an understanding of whether or not they'll be finishing around midnight or 1 a.m, and it all feels a little bit like, well, we're not too sure because we want to test the water, and I have a respect to that, because obviously businesses want to thrive, But the reality is we do have some concerns there, and we do have a policy that's gone through all the way to full council, and we have policies and measures that have been put in place that are supportive of the violence against women and girls agenda, particularly on the likes of issues around Sarah Everard and some of the issues of protecting women, and where these were discussed at a licensing committee. The way they were worded within our own policy was that it was all staff members. It wasn't just women, it was all staff members, and we wanted to put staff welfare first. So we don't necessarily have that. And for me, in terms of acting as a responsible authority, it comes across ever so slightly that an application has gone in without real recognition in terms of what the policy is for Wokingham, or what the expectation really is for this site, and really it's almost a case of we'll see where it goes. And I think from my side of things, if we're going to be minded as a council to grant a license application, what we should have before us is a real understanding in terms of what the hours are going to be that are going to be applied for, what provisions are going to be in place that support the licensing objectives, and as part of that application, from the outset, my expectation would have been that it was drive-through only. These are the hours, and this is your risk assessment. And I think we've gone some way during this process, and we've gone some way. We've got it is drive-through only. There's a slightly better idea around the hours, but we're still missing a risk assessment in terms of the Get Me Home Safely campaign. And I think there's recognition from this in terms of the applicant solicitors, and Alex absolutely speaks well. There's a lot of calmness to it all, but I don't think we can come too far away from the fact that this application isn't as sound as it might well be. And we do have some present issues within Wokingham, particularly around the PSPO that's occurred in the past. 2 years ago is obviously some time ago, but there's real concern from ourselves as a licensing authority that where we alter we alter the landscape now with a new change of business, particularly with a drive-through that's attracting users of vehicles to the area. It isn't beyond us to expect that there could well be issues from there. And I think in terms of your expectation, it's right in terms of the police and the council to take an enforcement approach, and we have done, because we've introduced the PSPO, we've tackled some measures there, we've changed some barriers in terms of the car park, and that's removed some of the risks. So in all of this, you're quite right to expect that the council's got a role, but at the present we don't have CCTV in that area. That would be some cost to the local authority. Where is that money going to come from in terms of putting CCTV up over the roads that connect Burger King and so on? So it does place us in a slightly difficult position, and probably puts the council at a greater ask, should it be the case that it does become an area once again with vehicle nuisance type issues in terms of extra cost on the council. So from the perspective of licensing as a responsible authority, I would just draw attention to the subcommittee how we've had several amendments to the application, which I'm grateful for, and go some way to an improved application for the site. However, we are still missing the risk assessment in terms of the Get Me Home Safely campaign. We still don't have a firm understanding in terms of the hours that are actually being applied for. And I would encourage the subcommittee to show caution to this application. And I would maintain the position that's written in the representation to refuse the application at this point, on the grasp that the policy has not been fully complied with in terms of providing the detail that's necessary, and that would put through my application on behalf of the responsible authority. And I'm happy to take any questions from the applicant or from councillors in terms of that position.
I can see no hands up.
We wouldn't mind just asking a quick question, if that's okay, or a point of clarification, if that's all right.
Yes, Alex, do that.
Thank you. Just on appreciate this point in relation to the Get Me Home Safely risk assessment and all of that point. As I say, we have offered a condition in relation to that, and I'm more than willing to get a risk assessment or Get Me Home Safely assessment over to you guys, no problem. It's something that we already vehemently do at the site in order to make sure that people are getting home safely. I think the two questions are in relation to that is, can you appreciate at present we don't have that risk assessment, because at the moment there is no requirement because we don't have the license, and we wouldn't need to do so unless this is this application is granted. And I think the other point is that, can you also understand from our perspective, at the moment the Burger King does shut at 11, but that's not when the staff leave probably at around midnight, and we do make sure that all of those staff do get home safely. In terms of an addition to that, like, the hours will be increased hopefully should the application be granted, but if this application was to be granted for 24 hours, then we would have night shift staff who would possibly be leaving at, say, as you say, potentially 6 or 7 or 8, when there is an easier way for people to get home, which possibly, as you say, is a little bit safer than those people who are currently presently leaving at present, because it has to shut at 11 and we have to close down by that 12 o'clock time.
If I can support Kieran here, the Get Me Home Safely campaign is something that the licensing committee feel very strongly about and are very proud of having introduced. And I realise, Alex, for you it's not consistent with all other areas. It's very different, and so I understand why it's missing.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not. We have offered that, just to be clear, we have offered that as a condition, and we are more than happy to abide by that, and we appreciate the concerns for this council. That is absolutely sure. We already do a lot of the measures already in place for that. It's just not called, as I say, Get Me Home Safely policy. It's called, a staff welfare policy.
Yeah. So Alex, I think the question to me was around, your effectively the appreciation that you may have some policies in place supporting that, and so on and so forth. It's a slightly difficult position, because in terms of the council, in terms of the policy that we have, there's an expectation that the risk assessment's included as part of the application. Where we don't have the application at the moment, that information is not necessarily available to members of the subcommittee to review, and it could well be the case that once that's submitted in terms of risk assessment, there may be discourse in terms of members wanting to ask questions around what the measures are. If it is a case that taxis would be reimbursed, if it is a case that there's acceptable or other arrangements home, but without that actually available to the panel at present, it places them in a position of potentially granting an application where there are some issues that have been raised, and without that as a document to review, and with that, it places ourselves, as in terms of a licensing authority, as a responsible authority, it places ourselves, which I represent, in a position where I'm unable to withdraw that representation. I do appreciate that can come across as quite bureaucratic. It's not necessarily our intention. It's more in terms of how we've introduced a new policy that's been freshly updated, and with some credit to the licensing officer. It was prompted during that application, during the consultation period. I'm not looking to catch anyone out. I'm certainly not looking to swim points, but I would welcome submission of that. A submission of that, and therefore I'm not able to be placed into a position of withdrawing the representation at this stage. I'll just put into the chat some of the text around the policy, around the Get Me Home Safely campaign, just so that we have the full clarity of picture. Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to ask for advice now from Rachel and Luciana about the situation that we are now in, and that we don't fit with our policy, but we might be minded to grant it the license, or we might be granted not to. If that policy were there, what can we do?
So, sorry, which part of the policy? Because we're working with the Get Me Home Safely policy.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty is that's Wokingham's policy. It's not something which is of utmost importance with the licensing objectives, because it doesn't touch on any of the individual licensing objectives. However, it is something which is the will of the members of the licensing committee. What I suppose what I'm not clear about is how much of a substantial issue it's going to be, because if this place is to be open all night, surely people would be working all night shifts as opposed to finishing at 2 or 3 in the morning, where you might have with a bar or something. But that could be conditioned, that it couldn't be put in place without a Get Me Home Safely policy. And as has already been addressed, they don't have one at the moment because they're not operating out. In fact, Burger King and Wokingham, as far as I'm aware, don't have any form of license under the Licensing Act 2003 at the moment because they don't need it. So this is a whole new ballgame in terms of needing the licensing, therefore falling within the scope of the WBC Statement of Licensing policy. And so this is something that could be conditioned if you were minded to grant it. But it's also something you may well consider. I don't know if
Andy,
that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Andy, I'm not going to bring you in at the moment because this is a problem with the Wokingham policy that we need to sort out. So I'm going back to Kieran.
Thank you, Chair and your legal representative. Just to have clarity, we have the Statement of Licensing policy, and as part of that, I've included in a chat there, there's an expectation of any new application or even a variation that as part of the application, the risk assessment is provided. So the expectation is there on behalf of the applicant. And during the consultation for this application, it was prompted to from our actual licensing officer in terms of Alec, who's produced the report, and then later on at the end of that consultation period, a representation was submitted by the licensing authority as a responsible authority. So it's been brought through in terms of a gentler approach of requesting it during the application, and then it's been brought through as a representation. We are during this hearing, we have heard, all of us have heard here, that there is some level of not quite understanding in terms of what hours are going to be used for the site itself. We've obviously had the original application until 24 hours and 5 a.m. until for the late night refreshment. There's a recognition that it may well be the case that this site will not need to benefit from as late hours as that. But then that brings members of staff finishing a bit earlier. So you obviously have a decision to make around that. From the perspective of submitting a representation, because you're absent of that information and you're absent of that risk assessment, it's not possible for the responsible authority to withdraw a representation in that way. It could well be the case that a future application could be submitted which has greater scope in terms of the actual hours that are wanting to be applied for and made use of, along with that as a risk assessment. But on the basis of how this application has come through at present, I appreciate that there's been amendments through it and we've got it to perhaps an improved position, but still there's matters outstanding, which means the representation is maintained. The responsibility in terms of addressing that sits with the applicant alone. Thank you, Chair. Rachel.
So Luciani and I have just been having a discussion around this, and obviously it is going to be it is raised as an issue in alignment with Woking Borough Council's statement of licensing policy. We don't know how the respective parties would feel about this matter being adjourned in order that could be dealt with before further consideration.
I would agree. I'd be in agreement to an adjournment.
In terms of an adjournment, if you're happy to do so, that's totally fine. In terms of the actual Get Me Home Safely policy, again, we're more than happy for a condition to be added to say that prior to the premises opening later hours or prior to the premises opening 2300, that the Get Me Home Safely policy is in agreement with the licensing authority or the police authority. Again, we have offered a condition to say that we're happy, more than happy to add in the policy at present, just because of the hours in which we are seeking. We don't, on the hours in which we are currently trading, we don't have the risk assessment in place because there is no requirement for people to, there is no requirement for that. But as soon as they say, if you are minded to grant the application, we are more than happy to provide the risk assessment, more than happy to show all the policies in place to make sure people do get home safely. But it is up to yourself to decide. We're happy to make the adjournment if you see fit, but we're also happy to add a condition that should the application be granted prior to any opening of those hours, we are in agreement with the Get Me Home Safely policy and a risk assessment to be agreed with the licensing authority.
My next question is, how do we physically do this? Do we have to have another hearing, or can we do it outside of this meeting and leave that further decision to officers?
We would have to have another meeting, or we'd have to
But we
resume this meeting with the same people. It would be effectively adjourned, part heard.
Okay. Andy, did you have something different to add? Because I'm very aware that you're not a borough councillor and so not part of the committee.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was a question, really. I was just wondering, I mean, can the committee decide on the, is it possible for the committee to decide against the application on the basis of all the other evidence rather than waiting for the Get Me Home?
It is possible, yes.
Okay.
Are you in agreement to an adjournment, Councillor Croy, or it seems sensible? It seems sensible in terms of giving the applicant the best possible opportunity in an interest of a fair hearing.
So, I just don't think it will make a difference, but that's me. I'm not exactly neutral, so whatever people want to do, I'm easy.
Understood. Right. That's it.
May I then make a suggestion that we adjourn this meeting until Alex has provided us with those policies that we've discussed, and then we gather again to make the final decision once the officers are happy that those policies meet our policies, and that both Alex and Kieran's department will work together on that. Am I allowed to do that?
It's up for Rachel to decide. We're more than happy to liaise with Kieran in relation to Get Me Home policies, and if you think suitable, that's perfectly fine.
You are allowed to do it. I would be very keen if the panel is minded to do that, and I can see that Stephen still wants to say something. I would be very keen to get a time scale and a date fixed today, rather than allowing this to go off into the ether, particularly bearing in mind that we would need to see the same people in the room and it would be effectively frozen in time and adjourned, part heard. So I wouldn't want it to be simply adjourned until it's provided and officers have considered it. I would like to say it be provided by X date if it's going to be provided, and we reconvene on Y date.
Okay, I'll take the comments from my fellow committee members. Stephen.
Thank you. I think it's right that there has been a focus on the Get Me Home Safety thing, and I raised that and my concerns I voiced earlier, so I won't repeat those. But I don't think that's the only issue that's still got to be resolved here, because we have an application which is very specific in terms of the opening hours that it's asking for, and the risks around that are one thing. And then we've got them saying during the course of this, but we may not actually be open for those times. We may only want to open on certain days or for certain hours. and I think from my perspective, I'd like to have some greater clarity around what they're actually applying for. So I think we need to look at that again. And also, if they are only going to open for certain hours, as we said, the risks of getting home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning may well be very different to getting home at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think that this needs to be addressed in terms of what's the plan, what's the policy to cover these various options that I talked about. And I don't think that was being covered. I'm also not entirely comfortable with this idea that we'll wait to see if there's a noise nuisance from the vehicles and from the tannoy or anything else, and then we'll try and address it. It seems to me that some of these things are foreseeable rather than sort of, well, let's see what happens, and if any. And for the reasons mentioned, I think we've got a bit of a duty to actually make sure, because it says the applicant is going to mitigate against noise coming out from the premises, and in the premises in my mind is the area. It's not just the building, it's the driveway and all the rest of it. So I think for me, I would be looking for them to be more proactive in terms of, you know, what steps are you actively going to take in order to allow us to think that this could work sensibly and safely, rather than we address things after there's been an issue, or we seek to enforce to close it down. That doesn't seem to me to be a very sensible way forward. So I'm just wondering whether, rather than it just being about the policy being provided, there needs to be a bit more thought about those other issues as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Rebecca?
Similar to Stephen, I don't see this policy as being a full, would have an impact in us deciding whether we were or were not to grant this licence. So I don't see it as a reason for us not to come to our decision as a panel today. So I would be happy as a panel to discuss this and come to our decision today. Without this, I don't see that as a real reason to delay the procedure.
Right, okay, thank you. Who's going to sum up first? Sorry, I still haven't got my notes.
I believe it's me in the process.
Thank you, Alex, for bearing with me.
No problem at all. No, thank you, and I appreciate everyone's time today, and it is greatly appreciated. I will try and sort of pick up all the points separately. In relation to the points raised by Kieran, again, we completely understand the Get Me Home Safely policy. We have added a condition to make sure of that. It's noted that we should have provided the risk assessment to you during the application process. Again, apologies for that. It's one of those sort of chicken and egg scenarios to us where we don't have the policy in place because we don't need it at present, but obviously if the application be granted, then we need it and we need to provide it. If you are minded to grant the application, we're more than happy for condition to be agreed to say, should we trade these hours, then that policy needs to be in place and agreed with licensing prior to those trading hours. We're more than happy to do that. As I say, we have a lot of policies in place already to make sure staff do get home safely. Just picking up on Councillor Newton's point in relation to what the application is and some further points in terms of hours. We did apply for 24 hours and we've applied for that for the ability to have that commercial flexibility. Now, I understand you're saying, well, we could have someone opening at midnight and then we may choose to open a little bit later. Obviously, if we were to be minded to grant the application until, say, midnight, we wouldn't be able to trade past midnight, and it would be a criminal sanction in which would be enforced upon us if we were to do so. So our thoughts and process with this, and it has been across the board and even here in Wokingham, is to trust the operator, trust Burger King to do as they say they will do and act responsibly, and believe us to do so. And should any concerns be raised, then we will deal with them appropriately at the time. We can't, as I say to you, oh, we only want to apply till 2 a.m. or midnight or 1 or 3 or whichever it is, because should we not use them or should we want to use it a little bit later, then we would have to go through this entire process again, speaking to yourselves and the Lex of licensing and all the other authorities, just to have an extra half an hour if we were to use it on one potential Saturday that may be busy. So it is just that idea of trusting us to operate those hours responsibly. if we are minded to grant them. Again, it won't be that we're just going to blanket go 24 hours. We're just going to take a step and managed approach to be able to use those hours. In terms of the noise, again, completely appreciate your concerns, and you want to see a little bit further from us in terms of how we're going to mitigate those noise concerns. At present, we don't think there are going to be any noise concerns, and you think it's to be readily foreseeable that there will be noise. We hope that and believe that there isn't really going to be any noise emanating from this site. At present, there isn't any noise concerns emanating from the premises. Your environmental health team hasn't raised an objection because they don't believe there to be any concern in relation to it. And if there is a noise, there are conditions which we have offered in the application which are readily enforceable to say that you can't do it, and it would be a breach condition, which is a criminal sanction. And we hope, as again, that you believe us when we say that we're not going to cause a noise nuisance to the locality, and if anything were to happen, we would rectify it immediately. It doesn't do good for us as an operator, it doesn't do well for the local community, and it doesn't do well of those two boding together if noise issues are created. We want to be the good friendly neighbour because that's better for business. It's not in our interest at all to be causing a noise nuisance, and it's not very good in terms of media outlets and news stories to say that Burger King is running 24 hours next door to an apartment which has someone sleeping in it and they can't get any sleep. It doesn't bode well for us, so we would much prefer not to have that, and we will make sure that that doesn't happen as we do across all of the sites. And again, I appreciate Andy's comments. I know we've had a lot of conversation about this, and Kieran, in relation to antisocial behaviour and concerns about noise and people driving in not so pleasant ways. The police haven't made an objection to the application. They've not had a concern in relation to that. We've not seen any antisocial behaviour in this car park or in the vicinity as of recently, but I appreciate that Andy may have seen some himself more so. We believe that having a responsible operator which has conditions, which has CCTV in the area, operating responsibly, will help, as opposed to putting people off from doing those sorts of things, as opposed to bringing an attraction of antisocial behaviour to the area. Again, it doesn't bode well for business. It doesn't do us any services. We would look to actively dissuade that from happening in that locality. What we want is people to be able to drive through at certain times, possibly on the way back from certain places, whether that be on holiday, whether that be potentially even a night out. If someone was minded to have a late night drink and wanted to drive home and they were doing so responsibly, or even individuals, as I say, from the hospital or wherever, we want them to be able to drive, get some food and carry on to their way and eat it at home. And that's all really that we're looking to do so, and we're hoping to do so in a responsible and orderly manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Right, we've got to a point now where we need to decide what we're going to do. The committee members have expressed sorry, Kieran, did you want to?
It's just summing up for Andy and then myself as well. Sorry, Beth.
No, that's fine. Go on.
Shall I go first, Andy, this time?
Yeah,
okay. Thanks so much. We've in terms of so in terms of summing up, the representation from the licensing authority as a responsible authority brought out the issues in terms of the area historically being used for vehicle nuisance, and there's also issues around how the Get Me Home Safely policy is presently absent. We've also heard some issues in terms of the scope of times, opening times that are being applied for. I recognise the intention from the applicant in terms of what's effectively a scoping exercise for the use of the site, but there are some issues with this site, and it would have been slightly more welcoming to hear some of the measures from the outset that might promote those licensing objectives. For the time being, the representation that's submitted on behalf of the responsible authority is maintained for the issues that are raised around public nuisance and prevention of crime disorder associated to vehicle noise, and then also from a public safety perspective around staff welfare. But I would welcome the receipt of a Get Me Home Safely assessment as part of the application. But for now, I would encourage the subcommittee to refuse to grant at this stage.
Thank you. Andy, did you want to add something?
Just very, very quickly to say that I think it's unfortunate for the applicant that the location is in the wrong place. It's a residential area. It's too close to the town centre. It's not a city. It's not a Southampton. There's a lot of pubs, and there's nowhere else to go. And it's just unfortunate. I think if the applicant was in a different location, a half mile further out, on the Molly Millers estate, for example, it would be very, very hard. But to me, the Get Me Home Safely, although I'm a big supporter of it, it almost doesn't matter that there's enough going on to reject the application because of the disorder and the antisocial behaviour that through. I don't think any restaurant can control what happens when people are kicked out of the pubs at 12, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I just don't.
Thank you, Andy. The committee have expressed the decision to make a decision about the application today, and I think we now need to move on to do that. If there are no further comments, then I suggest that members who are not members of the committee leave this meeting, and we will get on and make our decision and be in touch with you within 7 working days, Luciana? Yeah, in writing.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Chair.
Alex.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Right. We are where we are.